Hey, what's up you guys? It's Meyer, and in this video what I want to do is show you how I do an uplifting trance template here in Ableton Live. The idea here isn't to be a template producer, but it is to get all your routing and stuff situated ahead of time. That way you're not spending so much of your time doing the same stuff you did every time. I used to be so vehemently against doing this, and it would take me 3 times as long to do tracks because I'd be spending so much time just doing the routing, then I'd forget stuff because I didn't do it right. So this is probably going to be a long video. I'll also have the template available for you to download, but I recommend you actually follow along with this and make it your own. Adapt, follow along, make the template how you want to make it, and you know, there might be stuff that I do that you don't want to do, or maybe you have a better way of doing things or just a way that works better for you. So keep that in mind, but hopefully you learn something, and yeah, let's get going. So first thing I'm going to do is create a new live set from scratch, which is pretty much what this was. And what I'm going to do first is I want to kind of get the tracks that I want to create kind of routed together. Now, if you've seen any of my other videos, I generally tend to create all the tracks that I need first and then kind of go and do processing. But the way I work in live maybe is a little different. And it's amazing how different working in different digital audio workstations can actually make you think and make you operate. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a kick channel. So we're going to do kick, and we're going to do sub bass. So the kick I like making red, the sub bass I like making kind of this deep blue. And for these guys is what I'm going to do is luckily I have Live Enhancement Suite installed. If you don't have it, definitely check it out. And I'm going to go ahead and add a simpler to the kick channel. And for the sub bass, I like doing, dang it, I don't have it. Anyway, plugins, let's just do silent for the sub bass. Cool. Now, one of the things you will notice about the way that I work is I like to use racks a lot. I find it to be very, very useful. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to build up some temporary racks that are going to allow me to help me kind of when I'm creating these projects here in this particular template, in this particular project. So I usually have mine already created and saved, but when you're working with something like this, it can be really helpful to kind of do this and create your own library of stuff. So actually before, and I shouldn't have even done this with the sub bass, there are a couple things that I want to create. So the first thing I want to do, Command G is going to group this into a sort of a rack. And the first thing I'm going to add is a utility. Now the reason I'm doing this is I like mapping the gain to macro 8 because I'm a big push user. So what this allows me to do is do volume automation directly on the push using, that's odd, using the last knob. So the maximum value I want for this gain is actually 0 dB. That way I'm only turning it down as things happen. So if I go to my user library, and there are a lot of ways you can do this, but I'm just going to call this, for the tutorial, this is going to be instrument plus gain. Cool. Now I can use this. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add under effects, actually I'm going to do it this way. I like using these auto filters for sort of filter automation. So I'm going to slap 2 of these on. This is going to be a low cut and a high cut filter. And I'm going to map these macros to these various parameters. So macro 1, macro 2, macro 3, and macro 4. So what I'm doing here is this is going to be low cut frequency. This is going to be high cut frequency. This is going to be low cut resonance, and this is going to be high cut resonance. So once again, with these resonance values, I like the minimums being 15%. That way it's not too steep or it's not too gentle so that it's affecting the sound. So do it this way, and for these I'm going to make these yellow, and these guys are going to be a little bit lighter yellow. So now if I go back to my user library, I can go ahead and save this as tut. This is going to be instru plus low pass, high pass. plus gain. So once again, easy enough to understand what's going on here. This is these two filters. And actually what I should do is I should name this low cut, and this should be oh, bastard. Okay, high cut. Cool. So for the kick drum, usually what all I need is I use this in one shot mode, and I'll put the kick there, and then I can use the fade out and the kind of the ending amount to choose the length of the kick that I want. Now I also like using this effect. This is the mega scope, and this is just a VST that allows me to see where the kick is hitting and at what volume. So you can see I can use this here on the kick. I'm gonna make this red for the kick, and I'll use it on the sub bass as well. So once again, here's the kick. Last but not least, I do want to add an EQ, just also as a spectrum analyzer, just to be able to shape the frequency of the kick. So generally I'll set the kicks low cut around maybe 25, 28 hertz, and I'm going to take the high cut off because I don't want that, and this will allow me to shape the sound of the kick. Now notice I'm not putting any compressors on here. If I think the kick needs compressors, I'll add it later, but there's no reason for me to have a compressor if I'm already going to be using a sample or something, or a synth that's going to make the kick, and no reason to use a compressor if it doesn't need it, you know? Don't just feel, because a lot of samples too are already compressed, so it doesn't even matter. So that's kind of what I'm going to do with this. Cool, so moving on to our sub bass, we're going to use the same thing. We're going to use an EQ, cut out the super lows, maybe around 23, and the highs, I might cut this down here. Just kind of gives me a way to do this. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add waves R bass here. Doesn't really matter whether it's before or after. Maybe I'll add it after. And last but not least, I want to add a utility for volume automation. Now, I generally will tend to add a compressor to the sub bass just because that way I can adjust different notes will come in at different volumes because of the way these filters are. So that just kind of keeps things a little bit more consistent, but I'm not going to do that right now. So I'm going to group that into a rack. Once again, map to macro 8. This is going to be sub volume, just for automating volume. Now, one thing I should mention, I am totally aware that I can automate these mixers. So you're probably wondering, if you don't know, Meyer, why are you doing this? Why are you making it so that you're creating another gain stage when you can just, which doesn't matter in the digital world, of course, when you can just use this? Well, I like using this for mixing and this for automation. That way, if I have some sort of weird volume automation, things fading in and out, and I just want to change the overall volume, I can use this for that. Now, I generally think it's a good idea to start with your kick peaking at just have a system. So I generally work with kick peaking at around maybe -7, -8, and then mixing the sub bass in to kind of match that. So I know pretty much by default, kick's gonna be at -6, and the sub bass is gonna be a little bit lower than that. So of course, what I gotta do is I gotta take this mega scope and put it here on the sub bass rack as well. This is now going to be blue, and whoops, did not mean to do that. And see, notice how these got the names of the channels and also got their colors. Pretty cool. Well, I just changed the color. So they just got the names of the channels from the things I was doing. So what this allows me to do is see where the kick's hitting, where the sub bass is hitting, and pretty much go from there. So I am going to select these. Well, actually, before I do that, I'm going to insert another MIDI track, and I'm going to go ahead and add silent. And the next thing I'm going to be doing is doing my mid basses. So I'm going to go ahead and add silent. Now there are a few things I want to add for these mid basses. First of all, I like using this MIDI effects. This is actually a Max for Live device that I made myself for this. And all it is it's just a mod wheel, but it allows for MIDI CC1 automation in the playlist. So I can actually automate this here in the playlist. So that way I don't have to do it on a clip basis, because that's the really annoying thing about live is MIDI CC and pitch wheel automation. And don't worry, I have another Max for Live device for pitch wheel automation too. You can't actually do it here in the playlist without using these devices. So that's kind of why I do this. This is the mod wheel. Now with these kinds of things, I actually like, and let me actually add utility while I'm at it. And let me also add an EQ because I know I'm going to need that too. And this is once again set to do some sort of low cut and some high cut just to kind of make it simple. So I'm going to group these together. I'm going to map the macro one to mod wheel 1. So that way if I'm using a push and I want to use the touch strip for pitch wheel stuff, I can use, well, actually I have to do it this way because I would have to map the touch strip to a MIDI CC if I was kind of trying to do it any other way. So that allows me to do mod wheel with the record playlist mod wheel automation on the push without having to deal with any of this clip crap, which gets really annoying. And of course, last but not least, same thing with this utility. We're going to map this to macro 8, and this is going to be volume automation. And I'm going to open up the mapping, and I want this maxing out at 0 dB. So this is turned up all the way. So before I go much further, I want to go back to the user library. I want to save this as tutorial. This is going to be instru plus mod wheel plus gain. This is going to be the basic rack that I use for pretty much all of my, well, pretty much everything, all of my instruments, and then all the processing gets done on a bus channel. The exception here is that with these mid basses, I typically find it's helpful to do LFO tool automation directly here as well. So what I like doing is if I expand this, you can see I have, well, I already like configuring this with the LFO tool depth to show up here. And the reason for this is I'm going to map this to macro 7, and this is going to be the LFO tool amount. So now this is very easy for me to automate throughout the track for these individual mid basses. How do I want to kind of have these, have the LFO tool kind of coming in, and I can of course adjust the curve that way. So pretty easy, pretty straightforward, but that's what this is going to be. And of course, the only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to map the LFO tool on to this value as well. And I actually have to invert this range, and I have to make this really small. Now what I'm doing by doing this, by mapping this with a minimum of 0 to maximum of 2, means that the LFO tool is actually going to be turned off when the LFO tool amount is at 0. And as soon as I bring it past basically like 2 or something, it'll turn the LFO tool on. So you can see that's it off, that's it on. So just moving 0 to 3 will turn the LFO tool on and off. Now, I don't think LFO tool takes a huge amount of CPU. It really doesn't. But of course, I just like having this flexibility of being able to turn it off, and it's not using any CPU when the depth is down all the way. So that's kind of why I do that. This is volume automation, or I guess vol auto. Can collapse that. And of course, going back to my user library, I'm going to call this tut instru plus mod wheel plus LFO plus gain. So once again, really easy to kind of go back in here and recall this as we need to just be able to create these instruments. So this is actually going to be mid bass 1, and I'm going to give it a nice color. Be blue. It's kind of nice deep blue. And at this point, I can just duplicate this a couple times. So I'm going to actually start with 3 mid basses. So mid bass 1, 2, same idea, and mid bass 3. And actually, you know what I should have done before I did this is I'm actually going to create, you know what, never mind. Undo that. We're just going to keep it like this. Going to group these together, and this is going to be the mid bass bus, basically, is how that's going to be. Give this its own color, and these are all going to be bussed together to this channel here, which is the kick and bass bus. So if you notice what's going on here, mid bass 1, 2, and 3 are feeding into the mid bass bus, and then everything from the mid bass bus, which includes mid basses 1, 2, and 3, the sub bass, and the kick, are all getting routed into the kick and bass bus. So kind of, once again, helpful for getting this, for doing all the routing and stuff ahead of time. Now I want to try something. I want to see if I can take this and put it directly on the bus, which it won't let me do. Which means what I have to do here is I have to pretty much do what I was doing before by taking the AQ, taking the gain, taking the, let's see if I can actually go back to my kick, taking these two guys, I really wish there was a way to turn this into a, actually is what I should just do is just take all this stuff in the mid bass bus and just paste it here. So we got low cut, high cut, gain, which doesn't matter, EQ, and the utility. So, and of course I'm going to add another LFO tool here as well. So I'm going to take these, I'm going to group them together, and we're going to do exactly what we did before. Now we have to do this again because this isn't an instrument rack, this is actually a bus rack. So I'm going to take this, this low cut frequency, map it to macro 1, high cut frequency macro 2, resonance for the low cut macro 3, resonance for the high cut macro 4, gain macro 8, LFO tool depth, macro 7, LFO tool on to macro 7 as well. And of course, we're going to do everything we did before. So setting this up so the LFO tool turns on when we actually have the fader down all the way, mapping the minimum values for these resonances to 15%. It's just the way that I do it. That way we're not having to worry about any coloring added to the sound when these filters are all the way open and closed. And of course for the gain, we want the maximum to be 0. Whoops. What did I just do? 0 dB. And I have my own coloring system too. So this is the low cut frequency, high cut frequency, and luckily we only have to do this once. Low cut resonance, high cut resonance. So once again, giving these guys the colors that I like using. LFO tool depth, I like making that green for whatever reason. We can once again collapse these, and we don't have to see that. Volume automation, cool. Because that's all taken care of here. So this is going to be TUT. This is going to be low pass, high pass, plus LFO, plus gain. And we'll come back to this later, but for now, that is going to be what we use here on the bus. So once again, this just gives me the ability to do all this processing directly on the push for the bus channel in addition to these individual channels. So that about does it for the kick and bass bus. The only other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take this megascope. I'm going to add it to the mid bass bus also so I can see what the mid basses are doing in real time along with the kick and sub. Now the really important thing here is where's the kick hitting, where's the sub hitting, how much are they overlapping, and is this causing any weird volume spikes or phase cancellations that we want to see in the time domain. I can also put this here on the mid bass bus or the kick and bass bus directly, just so I can see the overall waveform of both of these summed together in addition to the individual parts, and then of course the mid bass bus as well. Cool. So we're done with the kick and bass bus. I'm going to go ahead and move on. I'm going to delete these tracks because they're annoying me. And I'm going to go ahead and move on to the melodic stuff. So we're going to start with the leads. So this is going to be lead 1. And I like making my leads pink. Once again, if you've seen any of my other videos, you kind of know I have this kind of bizarre system. And I'm going to go ahead and take this this instrument mod wheel gain and put this directly on the lead channel. So this is lead 1. Pretty straightforward. We got the mod wheel, we got the volume automation, and then of course we can do any other sorts of automation here. I've recently stopped kind of doing this low cut on all of my channels sometimes because I find that sometimes I'll do it in the bus and I'll want to have that low frequency information during the breakdown or whatever. So taking this and duplicating it, we got lead 1, lead 2, and lead 3. We can go ahead and bus these guys together into a leads bus. Now these are pretty vibrant. I'm gonna go ahead and give that, you know what? I'll give it this color. Cool. So this leads bus, pretty much the same thing. We're gonna take the low pass, high pass. You know what? I'm not gonna do that. I'm going to take the, well, I will do this, but I know for a fact I probably won't use these filters. I'm going to keep them there just in case, but I'm likely not going to use them. And for the plucks, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to just duplicate this entire bus channel. This is going to be the plucks bus. I'm gonna have pluck 1, pluck 2, and pluck 3. So these guys are here, getting processed along with the leads all as pretty much one channel. So that way I can open these guys up and see everything that's going on. So where the meat and potatoes, and I like kind of giving these their own kind of color as well. The Plux bus can get its own unique bus color. Is most of the processing I do is actually on this group channel, which is going to be the leads and Plux bus. Now this is where all the magic in terms of processing is going to happen, is in this leads and Plux bus. So I'm going to go ahead and take this this filter thing that we had built before, but I'm going to add 2 extra things. The first thing I'm going to add is an Arts Acoustic Reverb, which is going to go before the EQ. And the last thing I'm going to add is a replica for delay. Now, of course, you can use the built-in delay in Live. You can kind of do it whatever you want, but these are the kind of the channels that I use. And if you notice what I'm going to do here, I'm going to actually map these to the different macros as well. So I don't think it really matters because I believe this is close to a linear delay anyway, so the order of the delay and reverb shouldn't matter. But what I will do here is I'm going to take the mix amount, I'm going to map this to macro 5, so this is going to be delay amount, kind of get its own odd color. I'm going to map this to delay amount as well, the device on. And for macro 6, we're going to map the reverb amount to macro 6. And this is actually going to correspond to the wet level. So this is going to be mapped to device on. This is actually reverb amount. That's what this, I guess, macro knob is going to be. Don't have to be super picky about it. Cool. Now for these reverbs, I generally like the dry value being pretty much close to 0. And depending on how picky you are, you can actually make it exactly 0. And then it's odd. These actually behave a little bit differently. This is a dry wet control, but it behaves just kind of like adding the signal up until you get to this sort of 50%. So notice how the input is passed through completely and the delays volume gets added until it gets to 50%, and then the input amount is lowered in volume. And with this reverb amount, it's just the volume directly of the wet signal with regard relative to the dry signal. So like before, we're going to take these device on controls and we're going to invert them and make them very minimal. So that way when the knob is all the way off, the devices are turned off. And when the knob is turned on just a little bit, the devices get turned on. So you can see, boom, that's on, boom, that gets turned on. The other things I want to do here while we're here, the delay mix, I only want it to go up halfway because I can't think of a single time that I would want the delays of the leads and the Plux to be louder than the actual original signal. So this way they can get turned up all the way means the delay is pretty much just as loud as the input signal. And of course, turning it down lowers the volume and until it eventually turns device off. And same thing with this reverb amount. There's a good chance I don't really need it to be much more than wherever this is at exactly 0 dB. So this goes up to 90 out of, so this is where we have to do some math. 90 out of 127. It's a ratio, so I can just go ahead and do this. 90 divided by 127, it's 0.7. So if I set this, going back to the mapping, to 0.708, and I turn this reverb amount pretty much up all the way, it gets close to, sorry, this should be 0.70, that's the issue. Close enough, minus 0.0. So turn down, that is, the reverb is off. Now this guy is going to be its own sort of sample, and this is going to be the tutorial. This is going to be delay plus reverb plus low pass, high pass plus LFO tool plus gain. So this is like the mother of all racks that I'm going to be using. And this is of course on the leads and plus bus, but we'll be using it again in the future for some other stuff. So that's why we save it. That way we can, of course, recall it later. So lead 1, 2, and 3, pretty simple. Pluck 1, 2, and 3, pretty simple. Leads and plucks bus, I am going to disable these. You know what? I don't know if it really matters. And then of course they go into this guy. Now generally, if you see me producing, I will add some extra processing to this leads and plucks bus as the time comes. So maybe that'll add some compression after the reverb, kind of glue everything together. But I'm not going to really mess with that right now because I could have it here because the template's already set up, but it doesn't really matter. So that's why I'm not really doing it at this point. Cool. So that's the leads and plucks bus. Now I'm going to take this lead 1 and I'm going to copy it outside, if it lets me, outside the leads and plucks bus, and this is going to be pad 1. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up. I like my pads being kind of like purple for whatever reason. Don't really know why. Maybe because of the P, who knows. So this is going to be pad 1. Same idea as before. We kind of have this low pass here because we don't want any low frequencies coming through. I will do this on the pads. And I'm just going to duplicate this. Whoops. Pad 1. Whoops, meant to rename it here. Pad 2 and of course pad 3. So 3 pads we have, grouping them together into a pads bus. And we're going to go ahead and take our monster rack that has the delay and reverb and the LFO tool and put it right here on this bus channel. That way, if we want to add any LFO tool to all the pads together, we can do that. And if we want to add any delay or reverb, we can do that as well. Go ahead and give this a nice kind of purple color. Cool. Okay, so this is the pads and the leads and plucks. The next thing I want to do is add a piano. So I'm going to insert a MIDI track, and under instruments, I'm just going to grab true pianos. And if you notice here, I've kind of already done all the stuff that I would want. In fact, you know what I should have done? Now that I think about it, I should have gone to my user library, and I should have gotten this instrument, the mod wheel, the LFO, and the gain. Actually, I'll take this one. And the only other thing I want to do is add in the LFO tool, which I will of course have to map just like before, but that's pretty straightforward enough. So macro 7, map to macro 7 as well. So we can close this. And it's really important with these LFO tools, have your ending point just a little bit to the left. Otherwise you'll get pops because it's actually going to be doing amplitude modulation and the audio rate. So don't do that. Just have it be like slightly to the left, so it can have some time to return back down. So this is LFO tool amount. And of course, mapping this, we can go ahead and do the same thing we've been doing. Invert this range so that when this knob is all the way off, the LFO tool is off. So instead of this sampler, this simpler instrument, you can use anything you want to use. I may just use the grand piano within Live, like that a lot. It's a rack within a rack. And if I go back to the user library, I can save this patch as instru plus low pass high pass plus LFO plus gain. So just kind of naming it in a way that makes sense to me. And this is just very simple. This is going to be the piano. And last but not least is what I'm going to do. I'm going to add, I'm going to duplicate this channel because I'm going to use these same kind of routings. But instead of this piano, I'm going to use this as a sort of sub pad. So this is the sub pad. Go ahead and give it a nice dark color because it's a lower frequency instrument. It's kind of the way that I think. And like so, now we got the leads and plucks, pads, pianos, and sub pad all grouped together. So I'm going to select all these guys and I'm actually going to group them together. And this group, I'm not going to do any mixing on. This is just I'm just calling this melodic stuff. And it's mainly, this is just here for organization. So if I want to look at the leads and plucks, pads, all this stuff together, I can do so. Otherwise, maybe I don't want to do that. I want to just be focusing on fills and effects and stuff. Give me that option as well. Next, I want to move on to the sort of, what am I trying to say? To the percussive stuff that I want to be using. So if I go back to my user library, I got this instrument plus gain. Gonna go ahead and put that here. And notice how as I'm doing this, I'm not putting any sounds in here at all. And I'm very deliberate about this. The reason I'm not putting any sounds here is because I want to make sure that I'm not just using the same stuff every track that I make. I'm having to go and make an effort to get new samples or create my own and stuff. It just kind of helps me, forces me not to get lazy, to be honest. So the percussion that we're going to want to have, and I like making these kind of red for whatever reason. We're going to have a clap, have a closed hat, going to have an open hat, going to have a ride, and I'm trying to think if there are any other really important percussion pieces. There's one more, and this is going to be an auxiliary percussion, I guess, group of stuff. And what this auxiliary percussion, I'm actually going to use the drum rack for. So if I go to instruments, I put a basic drum rack in, and really all this is it's just for any other percussion hits that I want to have, I can kind of do it this way. And then of course I don't even really need this, because unless I want to, I guess, have some loops and stuff and filter them out, so maybe I'll keep it. And that's what this stuff is for. So can group this all together. Percussion, this is going to be a nice little percussion bus. I don't know how I feel about that. Cool. Go back to the user library, and this is going to be, I'm going to go ahead and take the low pass, high pass, LFO tool and gain, and put it on here. So that way it helps me filter things in and out, along with adding any sort of side chain that I'd want to add. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some loops, or area for some loops, and I like using Vice for this. So I'm a diehard FL Studio user, and I'm so used to SliceX, and I love how easy it is to create, sort of chop up MIDI and things like that. So that's why I like using Vice. So it's just this VST from New Sonic Arts. And the cool thing about it is you can actually take the MIDI from the loop that it's chopped up and drag it directly onto a track, and this is these individual drum hits. So then it's very easy to sort of kind of create your own loop by chopping these samples up. This basically maps your loop into its own drum kit and then lets you play it as this MIDI clip is basically the MIDI notes triggered to create this drum hit. But of course, then you can take this drum kit and make it into your own loop. So I like using. So I'm just going to call this percussion loop 1. Make this to be kind of light orange. And I'm going to duplicate this. Oops, don't want to do that. And the mistake that I made here before I did this is I should have done this as this instrument with the LFO tool and the gain on it. So I'm going to go ahead and add this. Now, of course, this isn't an instrument that has a mod wheel because it's a loop. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of that macro. But of course, I do want to have the LFO tool there. And now I need to go back and get Vice for real this time. And that's going to be there like that. So duplicate this. So I have this already set up for 3 percussion loops. And I'm going to create this into a bus. This is just going to be the percussion loops bus. Let me give this a maybe more solid orange color. And the thing that I'm going to add with this on this channel is, of course, the low pass, high pass, LFO tool, and the gain, like so. And this percussion and loops is going to go into this area, which is really just kind of the overall perc and loops bus, which I'm not going to really do much processing on because no reason to. Now I know for a fact ahead of time I'm probably going to be turning these guys down, so I'm just kind of doing that now because I know these guys are going to come out pretty loud if I'm mixing around the kick at -3. So actually I should just, oh, it's weird, it doesn't let me do that. So I'll select all those, go down to -3, same with that, cool. And actually going back to this, I should have known that this is the same thing. -3, -3. -3. So I'm turning the buses down to -3 in addition to the individual channels. That way I have headroom either way without having to worry about going over 0. It doesn't matter because live runs, of course, in 32-bit floating point, so you don't really have to. But the reason I do this is because getting over 0, it's like there's like this stop where it snaps. So I just kind of am trying to avoid that. So call me lazy. I'm lazy. Work smarter, not harder, I guess. But this is like really not working hard. Cool. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is, and this is going to be really simple, is create some audio tracks for effects. So I'm going to create an audio track. And I think it put it in here, unfortunately. This is going to be crash 1. So I like using 3 crash cymbals and at least 3 sweeps in these tracks. So I know ahead of time. It's crash 1, crash 2, and crash 3. All this is going to be is just really, really simple. This is going to be, what am I looking for? Well, really was what I'm trying to do here is something like this, except, and I know I created this rack. That's an instrument. That's an instrument plus the gain. Oh well. Well, it doesn't matter. What I should do no color. And this is just really simple on these guys for these crashes. Cool. So this is just, if I want to do any sort of automation on the crashes, I have the ability to do that. That's these guys. And then I'm going to actually duplicate them. And we're going to use the same things for sweeps. And these guys may make a more green color. So these are kind of crashes that are layered then with sweeps and stuff that I want to have. I also tend to like to have a sort of instrument rack. So this is an instrument rack with the mod wheel, the LFO tool, and the gain, of course. But instead of this mod wheel, I'm actually going to find I have this other Max device which allows me to use a mod wheel and automate the pitch wheel. So this I can automate in the playlist over clips and just kind of for this, and this is going to be a synthesizer. So once again, this allows me to automate both the pitch of whatever the instrument is and of course the mod wheel as well. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and go back and find silent and put that in here. Cool, pretty easy. And last but not least, I want to add an audio track. This is going to be for like an impact. Doesn't really need it. You can just have a deeper color, I guess. And this would be for some like sub drop or some boom or some big kind of thing like that. So that's what this guy's for. So we got our crashes, our sweeps, a synthesizer, some big sort of impact effects. And there's a good chance I would add more than these numbers of sweeps. So after the impact, maybe there'd be like risers and stuff, but let's pretend I didn't do that. I'll just leave it like this, and then it's easy for me to duplicate them. So this is all going to get grouped into this, what I'm going to call an effects bus, but I'm actually really not going to do too much with this. I'll give it a color, but I'm not going to be really messing with this too much right now. Now, most of these effects, I'm going to use a reverb send channel. So I haven't touched these. These come in by default, but I will actually have a reverb send and a delay send that I use that I can then route these tracks individually to if I want to use reverb and delay. So, so for the delay, I generally, for some reason, use green, and for the reverb, generally use blue. So I'm actually going to use, if I go back here to my user library, I'm going to take this that has the delay, reverb, and LFO tool. And at this point, I actually am going to unmap, remove this mapping, turn it on, get rid of that. And I really don't need these filters either. So I'm going to get rid of those as well. So this just allows me to control the automate the volume of this reverb, and also the LFO tool if I want to have side chaining, to have the reverb side chaining throughout the track. Dry, we want it all the way down, and wet, I'm just going to set it to 0. And this is just going to be this like enormous reverb send, and just like that. The same thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take this reverb send, copy it to the delay send, and get rid of that delay, and I'm going to get rid of this reverb, and in its place, I'm going to put replica. And this is just going to be delay send that is 100% wet this time. So this means rather than doing any processing like this on the bus channel, they can be sent directly to the send as needed to be, and the amount that they're sent is going to be the amount that they're getting delay and or reverb on the track. So that's why I've done that. Last but not least, I want to add, well, there are a couple other things I want to do too, but the next thing I want to do is do acids. So if we go back to these instrument channels, and where are they here? My user library, instrument, mod wheel, LFO, and gain. So create a new channel here, acid 1. Acid 2, and this last but not least, acid 3. And these guys are going to be then grouped pretty straightforward into a bus, which is the acid bus. And this acid bus, I'm going to give it its own color, and I will likely use this big rack that I used before that has the delay, reverb, and LFO tool along with the filters, but may or may not actually use these delays and reverb. They're just there as an option to have them. Last but not least, I want to add atmospheres. So I'm going to add a MIDI track. This is sort of usually I would use Omnisphere for this. So this is, we got the mod wheel, we got the LFO tool, and I don't know why this is riser. This is just, as we used before, we got the volume automation, we got the LFO tool, we got EQ, and then the mod wheel. And for the synthesizer, I think I will pull up silent, but there's a good chance I like using Omnisphere is like perfect for these atmospheric sounds. So this is the sort of like synth atmospheres that we have and we all know and love. And I'll insert an audio track, and this is going to be like Atmosphere 1. Going back to the user library where we have some of our things, I'm going to take the instrument channel that has the LFO tool and the gain, And I may actually use the one that has the filters on it, because that way we can kind of filter these individual atmospheres in and out however we want to. Kind of gives us more flexibility. So Atmos 1, Atmosphere 2, Atmosphere 3, and that's all I'm going to really mess with right now. Can of course bus these to an atmospheres group, or atmospheres bus. Take all these guys down to -3 or 4. These generally don't tend to be as loud. Take this down as well. And of course on the bus channel here, we're going to use our big rack that has the filters for the overall synth atmospheres, delay, reverb, LFO tool for all of them together, and of course the gain. And now that I'm kind of thinking about it, kind of coming back to this, there's a good chance I would like to use an instrument that has the LFO tool there on it for these assets, because I like to kind of filter these in and out as well. So I'm going to do that. I am going to take the mod wheel, wherever it is, MIDI effects, mod wheel, and I'm going to put this before the instrument. I'm going to go ahead and make this silent again, and we're going to map this to macro 5 mod wheel. Cool. So this is actually going to be the main rack that I use for all the assets. So, oops, what did I just do? So I'll take this, and of course I'll duplicate it. Acid 2 and acid 3. So starting off with just 3 acids, have the LFO tool there, have all the filters and stuff we would want to have to automate. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And of course the atmospheres as well. So I generally tend to like to take these acids and atmospheres and just group them together into an acids and atmospheres bus, because I generally tend to add these things last. So this I know I'm going to be returning to as kind of I get deeper into the production process. So this just keeps them kind of out of the way until I'm actually ready to take a look at them. The last sort of like, I guess, thing that I want to add is a sort of like fills and rolls bus. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to insert a MIDI track. And if those of you who have been maybe skeptical have noticed, I haven't added a snare roll. I actually like grouping these with kind of some of the other fills and rolls that we're going to have. And this generally tends to be more up in line with the effects bus. So I may actually group these into their own, like this might be some sort of like sweeps and crashes thing. And this might be like things that are going on that are fills and rolls and stuff. So this is actually going to be a snare roll. Gonna do that, and of course going back to my instrument channel, or back to the user library, we can take the instrument that has the low pass, high pass, and the gain, and the LFO tool, and put it on this channel. That way we got all the goodies that we want to have. And instead of this instrument, I'm going to put a simpler in there. Not like that. Not that it replaces the rack that I have. So just going to drag simpler in here, and this I'll just use a snare sample to do the snare rolls. And in live, because I'm so lazy, I generally tend to use this volume automation knob to do the actual snare roll volume, and not the actual knob of whatever, or not the actual velocities of the notes themselves. And it's just because it gets tricky. If I want to add more complicated rolls and fills, it just gets to be a little tedious dealing with the clips and the MIDI directly. So that's why I do it that way. The only thing I will add is I generally tend to add a reverb here as well. And for something like this, it doesn't really matter. The stock reverb is more than fine. Whoops. So going back to the snare roll, take this reverb and put it here before the filters. And we can, of course, map this dry wet to macro. I think I was using 6 for reverb. Let me see. Yes, I was using 6 for reverb. So just trying to be consistent. That way, when you're using the push or whatever, you kind of know what to anticipate. So this is reverb amount. So the nice thing about this reverb too is you can kind of increase it as the snare roll goes on to give it this sort of washed out kind of effect. So I find that to be pretty cool, pretty helpful to for doing that, and that's why I do it. You know, I can add a little bit now, and then as the snare roll progresses, it washes it out and kind of gives it this kind of swirly feeling or whatever. Cool. Cool. So that's a snare roll. Last but not least, I want to add like a fill. So this is going to be fill 1. It's a nice orange color. And what this is going to have in it is just like, this is going to be like a drum fill. So I'm going to actually call up Vice again. And I'm going to call up pretty much this, this whole rack, or sorry, this rack that has the LFO tool, the volume, and of course Vice. Fill 1, pretty straightforward. And I'm going to duplicate it because more than likely I will use 2 fills. So this is fill 2, and this guy is fill number 1. So fill 1 and 2, got the snare roll. So I generally tend to move these into some sort of fills and rolls kind of bus. Sometimes I'll do that, but I don't think I'm going to do it right now. And these could be grouped as like crashes and sweeps so that I can get them out of the way. In fact, maybe I will do that. This is just crashes, sweeps. That way, if I want to see the fills and stuff, I can. Otherwise, I can hide them completely. Same with the percussion and loops. So notice how these kinds of, with the exception of the kick and bass bus, which maybe I'll have an EQ on in case I want to use any of the shelves, the low or the high shelf, just for boosting anything in general. I don't have anything on these. These are just strictly there for organization so that if I'm working on the melodic stuff, that's easy to do, or the acids or something, that's easy to do without the other stuff getting in my way. And last but not least, I want to add these locators here. So this is song start, bar 33 is going to be the sub in. Here we can just say breakdown start. Give that another, I guess, 32 bars. Say build up. Now this is of course going to be very, this is very subject to change. That's a very short breakdown actually. So let me go ahead and extend that. Build up doesn't have to be super long. Generally I find that 16 bars works pretty well. So there's that drop, that'll be 32 bars. Then I'll say the outro. Now, sometimes you can do sort of like an ending drop where you don't have the kick and you're kind of filtering the melodies out. It's really up to you, kind of just being creative and stuff. It's the outro, and then maybe when the song's over, I'll have song end. Maybe we'll do, I don't know, 64 bars after that. That may even be a little long. Maybe I would do something like that. Maybe even shorter, who knows? So yeah, pretty much these sections are 32. Maybe I would start by doing something like this, but that is kind of a short, that is a really short kind of outro, only 32 bars. So just depends. That's kind of the general structure that I have. And then from there, it's easy to start thinking, okay, how do I want to start structuring it? Where's my kick going to be? Where the kick roll is going to be? All these things like that. Just kind of moving from there. One of the last things I want to do is build up this master channel with different effects and stuff that I would likely have on the master. And this will end up being a bus. So I'm going to go ahead and go in this user library of stuff. And I'm going to take this, the low pass, high pass, LFO, and gain, and I'm going to put it on here because I like having these filter controls for the master. That way I can kind of take the bass out really towards the end, or take the highs down a little bit before the drop or something like that. Just have that flexibility. The one thing I won't need is this LFO tool, so I'm actually going to go ahead and get rid of it completely, but we do want to have the volume automation there. The only other thing I want to say, and we obviously don't want to be doing anything with this EQ, in fact I'm going to delete it entirely, is I like automating this width control. This is something I got from Reorder, and really what this allows you to do is, as you're getting close to any big sections of your song, is what you can do is automate this width. Now we don't want it to go any wider than you would probably have it when you're automating it, but basically you can slowly decrease the width so that everything comes down to mono, and then when the drop comes in or something comes in that's big and has all these stereo information, it really kind of creates that juxtaposition where you're saying, oh wow, like there's a lot of stuff going on. So that's where that master width comes in. And then this volume automation, this is there, just slightly turn it down right before the drop or any other section, maybe a dB or 2 max, and that just really kind of can really create that huge impact when everything comes back in at full volume. So now I want to go over a little bit of my basic sort of chain of doing sort of mastering-y stuff. Now, this isn't usually what I would use is something like Ozone, and I generally don't tend to insert Ozone into my master rack just simply because it can be a real CPU hog, and you also don't want to be mixing. Well, I don't know. I don't think it's a good idea to be mixing with your mastering suite on, because then you're not really hearing what you're producing. I mean, in some ways it can be nice because you can know what things are going to sound like regardless. So there's kind of these two schools of thought, but I personally am going to stay away from that completely and just do things standard, and then I'll tend to export this as a WAV file and then open that in Ozone afterwards when I'm ready to do mastering. But the last thing I'm going to have in my chain is going to be Span, which is this spectrum analyzer. Now, one of these is a VST3 and one of these is a VST2, and I don't even know which is which. So I'm going to have that last in the chain and just on high resolution mode. That way we can see everything that's going on and do all the metering. Before that, the last thing in your chain, of course, you're going to want to have is the limiter. So this is just a standard FabFilter Pro L. Don't have to do anything like this. There are a bunch of good presets here. You can start as a good starting point, which is why they're here. This tonally transparent is pretty good. A lot of these are pretty good. So any of these are going to be good for that. And I generally tend to have this to a boost of maybe 3 or 4 dB, but I turn it off. So if I want to hear what it would sound like kind of at full volume with that limiter touching a little bit, I'll turn it on. Otherwise, I'm mixing with everything around the kick around -8 dB. So I have plenty of headroom to be mixing. And then when I send it off to mastering engineer, they'll generally tend to do the mastering to bring it up. Or if I do it myself with Ozone, kind of the same idea. And then, of course, the thing I want to do before this, I generally tend to use this FabFilter Pro Q on the master. And this is with a low cut, maybe around 20 some hertz, and a high cut, maybe around 19 kilohertz or so, just to get rid of this information that no one's really going to be hearing or systems aren't going to be able to really reproduce anyway. I tend to have very sensitive hearing, so I can generally hear maybe up in this range, but give it a few years and I won't be able to anymore. And of course, this low end, this is just going to eat up your headroom, an immense amount without really providing you any extra benefit. So generally want to cut that out too. And I generally tend to keep this off as well. And then when I'm wanting to hear what it would sound like with the limiter, because if I have plenty of headroom, it doesn't really matter if this stuff is here. I'll turn this on kind of as a kind of preview thing. Now, sometimes it's also fun to do some sort of other automation here with these macros. And I may set that up right now. So one really fun thing to do, whoops, what is this crap? Get out of here. There's this flanger. So if I go to the plugins and I go to, I like using this flanger for some reason. Just before all this stuff, and I'm just going to map this to macro 6. So I'm going to take the wet and dry and map them both to macro 6. And the way I want to do this, when this is down all the way, the dry is at 0 and the wet is at -infinity. And as we turn this up, we slowly let the flanger in. So if it's up all the way, we're only getting the wet signal and no dry. Now, this is very sensitive, so you generally won't need to be turning this that much. I mean, maybe up to like 2 or maybe like 5 or something. And then you're getting that flanger effect on the entire master without really doing too much of it. But that can be a really neat effect to have. And sometimes you can also use that on your kick and stuff too for adding the flanger to your kick rolls or your snare rolls, which can add a lot. So just call this flanger and give this a nice color. This is a modulation effect. Who knows? Just like so. So anyway, that's about it. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. The most important thing I need to do here, if this is a trance template, is set the tempo to 138. And now it seems to make a little bit more sense about the song ending happening after 64 bars. In fact, all this stuff can probably get pushed. I can probably insert some silence there. That's probably a little bit more standard. Maybe I delete this stuff. Who knows? What I meant to do here is go up here and edit, delete time. There we go. 6.5 minutes. That's pretty standard. If it's a vocal track, maybe it's a little longer. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and save this as one of my documents. And just call this spelled it wrong, but I can fix that later. Anyway, I hope you guys found this helpful. Hope you learned something. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or something like that, and I'll do my best to answer them and get to all those. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys later.